ExtraHop, and I'm going to talk about the JAMstack and TypeScript. So, raise your hands. How many people have heard of the JAMstack before? Okay, that's a few. I hadn't actually heard of it before I started this project. I will take you on the journey. We can all walk this together. So, classic story. I had a friend who wanted a website, and they're like, you know code stuff. You could help me with this, right? And they're a good friend, and I know code stuff, right? So I thought it'd be easy to slap something out real fast. But I only wanted to do it once. I wanted to make this website, and then he can go back and edit all the content himself. So I want some sort of CMS that just does everything for me. I can hook up to the CMS. He can edit all of the phrasing without me needing new commits on GitHub. And specifically, I also want to selfishly use this to better myself. I want to use TypeScript and React because I love them. I want minimum effort. I don't want to be doing a bunch of boilerplate that I don't have to be doing. I don't want many hosting costs because most of my personal sites are free. I use GitHub Pages for everything. I want maximum scalability. If this guy's website ever picks up, I want him to be able to click a button and it'll be fine. And I want maximum new hotness. I want to play with all of the new toys out there while I'm doing this. At ExtraHop, we do a lot of really incredible fun UI things, but we aren't doing a public-facing website. It's shipped with a tool. It comes with an appliance. And so there are a lot of more kind of consumer-facing tools that we don't get to play with that often. We also don't control the back end, so we've never gotten to play with GraphQL. I've always been interested in GraphQL. So back in my day, when I was a freelance website builder in 2010, the solution for a problem like this was to use WordPress. You'd use WordPress with a custom theme, or Drupal maybe. I never learned Drupal though. And then they would be able to access the WordPress CMS. They'd be able to edit all the content, add new posts or whatever, tag it in a certain way, and you'd have it show up on a certain page according to the tag. But WordPress is kind of gross. It's written in PHP. It's all these server-side templates. And it's this incredibly bizarre Byzantine architecture. It's many layers of features have been added over the years and by many members of the community. It's very confusing. So I did look into it a little bit. If I can use TypeScript and WordPress, I was interested. And there is an answer. There's this tool called Frontity. And they give you React and TypeScript. It's a progressive web app. It has server-side rendering, a Lighthouse score of 100. Like they were checking all the cool buzzword boxes on their website. So I was interested, and I started down this path, and I got pretty far. And I was struggling to learn the concepts and to figure out where things should be happening. And I finally realized that it wasn't my fault that I was struggling. They were just too tightly coupled with the WordPress architecture still, and it was kind of crazy. It was bad. I don't recommend Frontity. I think that they had a good dream, but I think that you should keep moving. Then I discovered the new hotness, the JAMstack. You've heard of the lamp stack. You've heard of the mean stack. This is the JAMstack. It has, well, I'll skip to that. So essentially it's two servers instead of one. WordPress, you've got one server. It has the CMS, the database, the server-side template rendering, and then it serves up the client from these server-side templates. It's all happening on one box. The whole idea of JAMstack is that you're doing a complete decoupling of the kind of data CMS management side and the actual client app or website that you're serving up. And so typically you use what's called a Headless CMS. This is a new thing since I was doing this in 2010. But a Headless CMS is you get that nice interface that a non-coder can interact with, but instead of generating a website, it just generates JSON APIs. And then you can use whatever you want, a mobile app or a website, that consumes these JSON APIs and displays the dynamic data that way. So what exactly is JAMstack? It has two different websites that explain it, jamstack.wtf and jamstack.org. I recommend .wtf. It's much prettier. It's got nice colors on it. So the TLDR, JAM stands for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup, which is a stretch. I think that they just wanted a pretty acronym. Really what's happening is it's statically serving heavy clients that are fetching dynamic data from arbitrary APIs. So it's just a way to have something where it's all static in the server. You're not rendering your template server side. And then in the client, it's fetching additional dynamic data if needed. It's commonly combined with a headless CMS. Instead of making those APIs yourself, you just use a headless CMS. It has the APIs, you hook into them. That's good for me because I don't want to reinvent a CMS myself. That's like a solved problem already. So for JAMstack tools, typically you're looking at some sort of static site generator like Gatsby, Next.js, Nuxt.js if you're a Vue person, but I'm a React person, Hugo, and more. Here's a whole list, staticgen.com. Everything has a website these days. It's very interesting. For static hosting, there's GitHub Pages, Netlify, Zeit, and more. This is a longer URL, but it's a list of hosting options. And then the Headless CMS, such as Contentful, Ghost, Sanity, Prismic, or headlesscms.org. So, yeah, I love it. The personal choices that I ended up with was Next.js, because I wanted to use React, and this was the most popular option. Zeit, it's by the same people as Next.js, so it's a natural choice. Also, I've always thought it looks very neat. I've always been interested in it because there's this cool triangle logo, and it's just a very clean, minimal website. And it has a free tier, so free static serving sounds great. For the Headless CMS, I ended up on Prismic. I started with Ghost because it reminded me of back in the day in 2010. Ghost was around. It's like a really old CMS option. But it's too simple. It is a blogging solution, and contents are just these black boxes. It's just like the rich body text, a couple fixed metadata tags, no custom fields. You can't create any sort of complex structured data. You can just kind of blindly render this HTML and drop it into the set dangerous HTML attribute in React. So it wasn't perfect. There's Sanity, which seems to be one of the older, bigger, like we offer custom fields in a CMS solutions. And it sounded pretty cool, but they had no GraphQL, and I really wanted to try GraphQL. So I kept looking. Contentful came up a lot. Even Lamb is not here tonight, but he was recommending it. But they had no free plan, and I really wanted something cheap for this. And so Prismic came up in the many lists of options, and it was good enough. It had a free option. And the client, the person I was using this website, I'm making this website for, they had used Prismic at a previous job, so they were comfortable with it, which was good enough for me. But we'll see later why maybe that was a mistake. So first, Next.js. So easy, oh wow, how have I never tried this before? Next.js was really nice. Strongly recommend Next.js to anyone looking to make a React app. It solves similar problems as Create React App, where it does the whole developer environment for you, tip to toe. You pass it this npx create next app -- example with TypeScript reads a little funny. Whoops. But what it does is it sets it up to have some basic pages, and all of the TypeScript is in place. So you can use TypeScript out of the box, React out of the box, everything out of the box. You don't have to do anything. It's got the live dev server, it's got hot module reloading, it's got code splitting, minification, transpilation, polyfilling. It uses Webpack under the hood, but you don't even have to ever look at that. I don't think you can see it, which is perfect for me. And then it also solves some nice static site things. It has really easy routing. It has server-side rendering when needed, so it's not strictly a static client-side thing. We can get into that a little more later. It has easy ways to make links that will do client-side routing and loading once the app is loaded in your browser. And it solves for purely static files easily. Installation is super quick. You do this, and then you can add the strict flag. It'll generate a tsconfig for you, and then you can just add the strict flag in there. And they actually recommend in their documentation that you should do that, so that was extra points in their book for me. First-class TypeScript support. They have, like, in their documentation, ways to use it with TypeScript. One example is that for the server-side rendering, they have this page component that are all these components getting loaded by their routes. And you can add a getInitialProps property. And what that triggers is it triggers a server-side data fetch. And it's really good for SEO. So if you have some dynamic data on a page, but you want like a web browser to be able to crawl it, separately, Google has kind of solved this problem. They're really good at digesting any sort of apps these days. But if you don't trust Google to have solved it, and you want this to behave more like a classic website, you can have it do some server-side data fetching with this getInitialProps. And if you just set the props of the component itself, getInitialProps will safely be type safe. It will throw errors until you're returning the exact correct shape of object. I just thought that was real nice. It's not bare minimum TypeScript. It's TypeScript all the way through. They've got solid inference in there. And then, incredibly easy deployment. So it works with the Zeit now, and you literally, in the root of your project directory, you just run npx now. And the first time you do it, it makes you sign up for Zeit. You have to jump off to a page real fast. You come back, and then you run it again, and it just puts it up into the internet and gives you a URL, and it's there, and it's working. And all I did was run 6 letters in a CLI. Things are so different since 2010. It's incredible. This was a really fun experience for me.
On that npx now, did you have to set up, the destination in the config file somewhere where you push it to?
No, I told it nothing. I just said npx now, and so what it gives you is it generates a URL based on your project name, and then gives you a whole dashboard for that project, and then you can later set up DNS stuff to point whatever domain you want to that, but then that'll also always be there under whatever URL they auto-generate for you. They give you a bunch of URLs too, but it's something like yourprojectname.now.sh. SH is a TLD now, which I did not know, because I've been making websites that aren't on the public internet for the last 5 years. For implementing a Next.js site, there's a whole kind of thing. I didn't want to make this presentation about how to use Next.js. I strongly recommend you look into it if you're looking to make a website with a tool that solves everything for you and is really smooth and buttery and nice. But with routing, you just add this /pages folder in the root directory of your project, and any page within it is the route that will load. So the index file is index.ts. Your domain /about loads about.tsx. If you have like nested folders, it follows that nested URL structure. Like it's very straightforward. Just folder names equals routes. You don't have to configure anything else. There are a couple special components in /pages. One is _document. That's if you need to augment the HTML or body tags, which I was including Google Analytics in a questionable way. I'm sure there's a better solution for this, but I was just loading it in the HTML in the head. And then there's an _app.tsx, which is more likely to get used. This is if you have like shared providers. So if you're doing something like hooks and you want to wrap your whole React app at the root, _app.tsx is the root. That's the one that everything else loads from. It's good if you're doing a site frame, like on this particular website. There's a consistent nav bar and footer. So you just have that in app.tsx. Every other page automatically loads within this frame. You do like top-level error handling, routing events, which we'll see on the same page. Static files are really easy. You just do a /public folder. That's your static files. So for me, I used it for the favicon. Nothing else. And then it has this built-in link component, which will generate an A tag or client-side navigation if possible. And so what happens is that when you click it, your website just kind of hangs for a second because you're doing it like within the single-page app experience is loading the next view. But then there's this library called nprogress that you just install, and really easily, all you have to do is hook it into these router events. You say nprogress start on route change start, and done on either error or complete. And it does that cute little, like along the top of your browser, there's that loading bar that comes in, and it intelligently fakes loading progress because you don't actually know how long the page will load. It doesn't know. you don't give it progress updates, but it does the Zeno's paradox thing where it will never reach the end, but it will artificially kind of look like it's iterating, like it does these kind of random chunked movements, and it feels so real. Like, I knew it was a lie, but it worked. And it's incredibly effective. Like, once the page loads, it just like clears out the rest of it. It's like, oh yeah, and it loaded. I knew that would happen. And it just flushes out. So it's great, and it was so easy, like 3 lines, and you're good to go. I strongly recommend one of those. For client-side data management, I use the Apollo library, because again, I wanted the new hotness of GraphQL. And it has hooks, another new hotness. Don't worry about Redux, it's all hooks now. And it was super easy. So it's kind of similar to ExtraHop. We use this remote data structure. We base it off of how Elm does it, where you get, instead of just this binary, like it's either succeeded or failed, you know that if it's been asked, or if it's in transit, or if it's failed, or if it's succeeded. They don't have the not asked for use query, but I was fine without it. Essentially, you pass it a GraphQL query, and then it gives you back loading. You check loading first. If loading, you show loading indicator. Or if error, there's error.message, and you can display that. Or it gives you your success data, and it was super easy. You know, put a provider around the root of your app, then you just access this, bing, bang, boom. Apollo advertises first-class TypeScript support, which is great, because the future is now. And it works for the little client where you set up the connection to your API, for the provider that you wrap around the base of your app, and for the hook itself where you're running this query. But for GraphQL itself, this is like an unsolved problem. The response is any, because you're just passing a string and of a structured GraphQL query, and it can't look at that string contents and be like, oh, well, I know what you're expecting based on this string. We are not there yet. But it does have generics, so you can write your own interface for what you expect. You can pass it in. When the data comes back, it will have that type. But there's no strict type checking. There's no actual, like, I'm at runtime going to examine this and make sure it's correct. So if it changed, it would just hope for the best. I didn't have time to explore options. There are tools for generating types. And I'm hoping maybe Nelu can talk about it next, because he's going to talk about type checker generators. We'll see if those dovetail. Prismic, which I chose for the CMS, also needed 2 client-side libraries. It needed this Apollo link for smoothing out their API request process, because they do this weird thing where you have to make 2 requests each time. You have to get a ref, they call it, just some string, and then you use that string to make the actual API request. You can't hang on to it. It immediately expires, one-time use only. But you never have to worry about that. You download Apollo link. Rich text renderer is also useful. So oh my gosh, I don't have a slide for Prismic. All right, so Prismic is this CMS where you can create custom fields. It's this nice drag and drop interface, so it's really good for people who don't code. And there's kind of 2 main interfaces. There's the create custom data types interface, where you're literally dragging in out of 10 different data types. There's like simple text, rich text, title, image, and that generates from this other view that you can choose to create content based on the types that you've built. And so from those types, it generates this form that's like, please enter your title and your simple text and your rich text and your image URL. With the rich text, it's really nice. It's like a whole WYSIWYG editor, bold text, lists, all of that stuff. When it actually sends that rich text down in an API response, it comes in as structured JSON, so it has both kind of the content text and then descriptors of what HTML elements should wrap it. So you need to pass that to this rich text library, so they're kind of consuming their own JSON, and then they can either strip the simple text out of it or turn it into JSX, and you just kind of embed it, like there's this rich text JSX component that you put in with the rest of your JSX, and it just works, which is nice. But both of these libraries have no types, not just bad types, no types, no type definitions. They both have open GitHub issues requesting them. I was so sad to see this. In this day and age, I feel like everyone's got great type definitions. So it's very depressing, and I questioned everything, but I was way too far down the path of Prismic to back out now. So I just patched it. I have like these really simple stub typedef files. For one of them, actually, for the rich text renderer, someone has an open MR with types, so I just copy pasted the contents of their MR into my project, and it worked great. But so overall, yeah, so that was enough. This was enough to make a custom website that you can visually edit. This kid can run off and edit his website, and I don't have to deal with it anymore. And kind of lessons learned. The Prismic CMS, the user experience, the actual interface is really good. It's a nice interface. Drag and drop all the data types I needed to do all the weird things I wanted to do. I could accurately represent all the different aspects of the website with their custom data types. So now everything on this person's website is editable by them. But the lack of client-side type definitions was so sad. That was a tragic event. Next.js plus Zeit is amazing, though. No reservations there. I can't believe I've never tried this before. Apollo was fine, but GraphQL plus types is TBD. I'm not sure how to solve that. I did later look if there are other CMS options that support TypeScript better. So Sanity.io, which I'd originally considered, it is written in TypeScript. They actually have a nice article about migrating their whole code base from Flow to TypeScript. Take that Flow. And their client library has type definitions. It took me a second to confirm that, but they do. There's also another one called Cosmic.js. There are so many headless CMS out there. I was very overwhelmed. There's no easy answers. They have a whole nice page for TypeScript. They have the TypeScript logo on the page, so they really put some thought into it. And then Contentful actually has a third party wrote a code gen, so it can scrape your Contentful schema, I am assuming, and it will make TypeScript interfaces that you can consume, which was like my dream, but I discovered that about an hour ago. So not in time to use it for this project. And that was my JAMstack experience. Any questions?
So did you just build Wix for free? Is that what happened there?
Yeah, I just built Wix for free. But yeah, it's very custom to what they wanted. It was fun to learn about these tools.
So are you going to now quit ExtraHop and go start a Wix competitor when you're learning?
No, absolutely not. I love it here. I'm not leaving. Yes.
There's a really cool article from Cloudflare from January 29th, which is long ago later. They talk about everything that you just talked about.
Oh, I wish I'd found this earlier then.
The only thing is that they'll do the API and the SSR on an Edge worker.
Oh.
Yeah. I posted a link to it inside the Meetup thing, so you guys can check it out. It's really long.
Good, cool, all right. Yeah, I don't actually know what Zeit is using for their hosting. I know it's easy to deploy and free, but I don't know what it is. It's probably not as fast as a Cloudflare Edge worker.
I don't know if this was a joke or what, but you mentioned that and actually I don't know if it was hooks or Apollo, but you didn't need Redux.
Yeah, you don't need Redux anymore. It's all hooks now.
I just like rewrote my whole app to use Redux, so I need to get this straight.
Oh no.
What are you saying?
Oh, my friend, I'm so sorry. So, we started with React and Redux 2 years ago? Yep, 2 years ago, good. And just about 6 months ago have started migrating over to hooks and only use hooks now. All new content only uses hooks. We've found a few edge cases that still needs a reducer and actions, right? Ted, do you have?
Can I
Yes.
add a little bit on this?
Yeah, field this one. Ted also wrote a lot of our helpers around our hooks.
The problem that we ran into was when we were trying to use Redux, we kind of used it a little wrong. So we had a lot of cases where we tried to avoid having connected components, like Redux connected things, inside not Redux connected components. That meant that we had prop threading that was worse than when we didn't use Redux. And we now had like 7 extra files per page for like the connected components, for the reducers, for all this stuff. So we moved to a model where we're using hooks to do data loading, and actions and sort of Redux things are now only for broad app level interactions. And that's been working really well for us so
What's an example of a broad app-level interaction that you'd want in Redux and not a hook?
Something like acknowledging a detection probably would be one where there's enough BI and other concerns that it would make sense to dispatch an action. We did, because of all the extra ceremony that goes into making a TypeScript type for a Redux action, that's now we actually found use methods, which we liked better. So it gives you the reducer-like model, but instead of passing an action object, you invoke a function. And that's kind of where we've been moving towards. So we're pretty much done with Redux, but there are a few places that still have it.
But it's still a great tool. You'll be fine, and I'm sorry.
So one thing about the Zeit free tier, it actually sleeps your site if you're not using it. So
Ooh.
it takes a few seconds, or maybe 5 or 10 seconds for it to start up again. But yeah, I use it. It's quite good. So.
That's really good to know. So if this guy ever complains, I'll tell him to start throwing some dollars at Zeit. Are there other free options that don't sleep, or is that something that you just have to
That's what it is.
Cloudflare edge workers?
Yeah.
Firebase hosting.
Firebase has hosting now?
Yeah.
I'm so out of the loop. No, yeah, well, back in my day, Firebase was just a NoSQL solution.
Firebase space deploy. A bit longer than
But still, just 2 words. That's pretty good. Okay.
Firebase does have free hosting too, so you can get quite a bit for under free tier.
Yeah.
For Firebase?
Yeah.
They also hook in with like Google Analytics, everything that you would want out of a CMS for as far as making money wise. They like it out.
Okay, these are good lessons. I'll go back. I probably won't put much more work into this guy's site, but if I do this again, I will know the right answers. And if you all want to like post that on the Meetup page or something, I will read it.
If you want to know whether or not it's basically sleeping in, you can just log in to there's a console within the site to see what's going on.
And it'll say if it's sleeping in there. Can I just like ping it with a little thing and I might just do that.
what's the editor's experience when they're trying to change some content before it goes up? So are you fully loading content dynamically in the cloud, or are you statically generating it? That's the first question, I guess.
Most of the content is dynamically generated, but it's a mix of server-side rendering for some pages where you want the SEO, so like if you want the page description first, but that's an editable thing. So it hooks in this Next.js get initial props. And so actually on the server, it will see it has get initial props. It will fetch that data from the server side, render it, and then serve it out. But then for some of the pages, it did not matter. And so it's all stuff where it'll statically serve just the skeleton, and then that skeleton on the client side makes API requests to fill itself out with dynamic data.
Okay. And for the static content, how long is the waiting time for the editor to actually see their changes being deployed?
Is it instantaneous? Yeah, it's fast. Especially
Because they are the only person working on their computer, and they are the ones making the deployment, right?
well, so they're not actually deploying again. I only deploy the first time. And so Prismic is already in the cloud. When they're editing stuff, they're editing it kind of live in the production server, basically. So when they edit content, that means the API is now immediately going to respond with new content instead of the old stuff.
So the way Firebase does, I can add a little bit.
Yeah.
The way Firebase will do it, for example, is like you'll post the Firebase real-time database, and that'll basically set like a cache expires, like header, quote unquote, to, and so the very first person who comes, very next person who comes to request a page is going to is the one who generates the new static, and then everybody else gets a fast version. So it's almost like putting another cache in the cloud at the very edge before you browse it. Instead of 3 or 4, it's kind of like getting a 3 or 4, not monetized.
I wonder if Zeit does anything like that for the get initial props and the server-side rendering. I didn't actually look into if they have any sort of caching. Huh.
Did you
I'll
like
look into
really
that one too.
test the server-side rendering?
What was that?
Have you really tested the server-side rendering? Is it usable without JavaScript?
What do you mean without JavaScript?
I mean, I'm like a JavaScript engineer, but I'm also a Luddite, and like I kind of am getting really annoyed by the web nowadays, and so sometimes I just don't have JavaScript on, and then if the site doesn't load, I just like, oh, I don't need it.
Oh, no, see, so this website, so some of the data is fetched server side,
Yeah,
but,
but I
but
don't
some of it's fetched client side.
So it won't work.
Yeah, it would not work. The client side data fetching would fail. This is like, it's like a rich single page app, essentially.
Is that when you're using, what if you wanted all your news before you got on the subway? Okay, so you're in this, you know, in whatever, you have a service worker that did before you go down the tunnel.
Okay.
Okay, so then I guess that would be rendering on the client.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Anyway, sorry.
There was another Zeit library similar to Apollo that I think did something like would start prefetching links in the background, but I didn't look into that further. Had a nice logo though, kind of wavy. Yeah. It was like a... I forgot I have the internet in front of me. Swear.
That is nice.
Oh, it's a nice... It's clean?
This must be a recent topic. I also ran across the idea that you can, if you have ads on your site, you can actually, or let's say you want to change the language, you do that on like the last hop. We had the last hop. While you're doing the SSR, the server-side rendering. So you can spit out like, I don't know, Dutch or, and then, yeah.
You're just kind of like hydrating the skeleton of the app
Yeah,
with
you
whatever
can
language.
hydrate. Yeah, exactly.
Ah.
So wherever I learned this, it must have been in like 2 hours because I don't remember like what is what. But yeah, you can hydrate in the middle, like on the edge.
I'm not supporting languages for this guy, but that sounds promising for
Yeah, yeah,
less lazy people.
yeah. Cool. Really cool.
Web development is really cool these days, I think, is the conclusion of this talk. And I mean, I'm really happy here, but also it seems cool to be a public-facing web developer.
We're joining the SAS team then.
Nah, I like this team. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody.